Good morning, guys. Today we're working on this Ford Ranger. This is a 2006 3.0. It's a manual transmission. Today we're going to take out this transmission. We're going to replace the clutch, the slave cylinder, and the master cylinder. We're doing all that together just to make sure everything works fine. We don't have any bleeding issues. The truck's got 150,000 miles. The fear I worried about was the exhaust. It already looks like the exhaust has leaks. I didn't want to take it all apart, so we were actually able to remove this transmission without taking the exhaust apart. This is a two-man job. You can do it by yourself. I put it back in by myself, but it did take a lot of time, and although it's not that heavy, it is a lot of work. One thing you guys should be aware of, if you're watching this video because your transmission's stuck in gear, you can go ahead and go all the way to the end, and I explained to you how those pins have to line up right around your shifter rod, and what that allows it to do is that it allows it to be in neutral. So if you look inside the top of your transmission, you see that those pins aren't lined up and it's stuck in a gear. That's the only issue. You just have to shift it and get it in neutral. So you'll have to pry that pin over and push it forward with a screwdriver. Again, hope this video helps, and if you have any questions, let me know.
For the drive shaft, you have 12.12mm bolts, and what really helps for these is to have a again, I paid for this tool a long time ago, but it's a swivel, like it has a slight angle on it, so it'll angle and clear this drive shaft. And I have a set of these, and it's again paid for itself over and over again. And all it does is let you put a slight angle on it, because you can't put a you could use a swivel, you could use a universal to get these, but again, this one really helps if you want to put some torque behind it. So 12.4 bolts, pretty easy. It drops down, slide it out of the way, and then continue on to the transmission and take that cross member out. To remove the rear cross member, there's one bolt that runs through it, and it's got a support on it to keep from collapsing this end. That bolt runs through, and then there's two on each side. They're just nut and bolts. So you have the 6, and then you have 2 here. So these are the ones you want to hit with PB Blaster before you take it off. I just let them soak while I took apart the drive shaft. It's those 4 bolts in the rear. But we have this electrical connection, comes on the harness. We're going to disconnect that one. We're going to disconnect this one at the rear. There's nothing special about them. They just pry right off. Here's a simple disconnect. We're going to disattach this slave cylinder. Right, and tuck it out of the way. Here's the line right here. And again, this has that little plastic clip on it. You can take a flathead or 2 flatheads and push it in, and it'll pop right out. It's pretty simple. Anything else? No, on the other side you have this O2 sensor. You can disconnect that if you want. I left it connected, and when I put this back in, we'll just pay attention to it. Alright, so the next thing are the bolts. The 2 bolts at the top, you can't see from here, but this is one bolt at the bottom. It's coming from the other side. These are all 15mm. They're very easy to get out. And then this one's easier to access if you lower the back of that tail. And you can get it again with a swivel and a couple straights. You know, you're going to need at least 18 inches or something like that. And that's 15mm. They're all 15mm. And the starter you're gonna get first. You're gonna have an issue with this bolt here. The bolt that was in here is too long. I'm actually gonna put a shorter one in here, because you can't actually remove the bolt because of this exhaust. There's no clearance here. These other 2, you can go around the exhaust. It's not an issue. You have plenty of access to get to them, and the exhaust isn't in the way for that. Again, we don't want to take this exhaust off because it's so rusted, and we're going to be able to twist this out just fine. The 2 up top, here's those two up top. I recommend before, one of the first things you should do is access those from the engine bay, and before you even lower this tail, they're easy to get to. You got to get it from the passenger side, and you're just going to need a little stool, but hopefully you can see them up there. Yep, there it is right there. and they're right next to each other, so it's very easy to get to. The other side has the same thing. It has those two bolts, just like this side. All right, so we actually have an issue on the splines here, where that pilot bearing rubs, because those bearings have been shot for so long. It's actually got some grooves in this, so we want to make sure it's perfectly smooth. We're not going to obviously replace the whole transmission, but we're going to take some emery cloth or 1000 grit or 1500 grit sandpaper and just try and polish this out and just make sure it's perfectly smooth. I can feel a little burr right here. It still has a shoulder on it. I mean, it's still thicker than the shaft itself, but we're just going to have to polish that out. And then before we slide this transmission in, there's two bolts here for the slave cylinder, and we're going to tighten those the same as the clutch to 20 foot-pounds. We were actually able to polish this pilot out pretty good. It's nice and smooth now. And again, you can just use emery cloth or 1000 grit and just work cut yourself a nice little strip and just polish it out like that. Just nice and slow. But again, if you're just replacing the clutch, you might as well go ahead and replace the slave cylinder as well. It's just good maintenance. And make sure you replace that pilot bearing. As you can see, we have our hammer set in, and we're just going to go ahead and hammer this out. We're going to do that by pulling on the handle and sliding this back to get it out. It's going to take two hands, so I'm going to have to do it. As you can see, after a few hammers, it's already started to slide out. It takes a lot of pulling and hammering. There are no bearings left in here, and I'll show you when I get it out. As you can see, I got it out. This is a blind puller, so it just goes on the inside and hooks it and allows you to pull it right out. But again, there's no bearings left on this. The next thing I did was I went ahead and used my DA sander to dull this flywheel down a little bit. I used 220 and just went around, dulled it down, sprayed it all down with brake cleaner, and now we'll go ahead and press in that pilot bearing. Throw the plate on here and do a crisscross pattern when we torque it down. We'll go to like 10 and then and it might be 20 foot-pounds. I'll look it up and I'll let you guys know as I'm doing it. For this pilot bearing, what you're going to do is you're going to take a socket that fits in the hole, just a little under the size or equal to the size of this bearing, and you're going to tap it down and make sure it's seated inside there. Just gently tap it, work its way down. It's going to go pretty easily. Next, you throw in the clutch and crisscross pattern the bolts. But if you look at this and you look at the front of the transmission, you'll see that it's not going to be an issue. You don't have to sink it in too far. I would just sink it in so the outside's making contact all the way. So let's look at the transmission. Alright, so as you can see where it slides down, it actually only makes contact down here at the end. Just this piece of the collar. Which means you have all this space here. You don't have to worry about it, if it's sticking out a couple millimeters, you have plenty of room. It's not going to make contact with anything here, so you're safe. Alright, so the first thing we do is we throw the clutch on right. We clean this off the surfaces to make sure it was nice and dull with brake cleaner. So we sprayed it off, got all the lube off of it. And then we put the clutch plate on there itself with the guide pin that you're given. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that clutch plate is marked appropriately. So it says flywheel side on one side, and then the side that sticks out has all the springs on it, goes inside the pressure plate. So what you want to do is you'll notice you have a little play in this pilot. You want to make sure you can wiggle it around as you're tightening this down so it's not being pinched in here. You need to be able to slide it out freely. You can move it a little bit. So then the next thing to do is we're going to take this to 20 foot-pounds. We'll do it in 2 increments. So I'll go to 10 first. We'll start top, bottom, and then we'll hop over here in a star pattern. And that's how we're going to do it. The next thing you're going to need to do is remove this master cylinder. Under the hood, you can do it with everything with a flathead here. So you're going to pry one end out. It actually sits on the firewall. You're going to pry one clip out, and this will pop right out. After you get that clip out, it'll slide out of the other holder on the other side. And if you didn't use a flathead already on the slave cylinder attachment, there is a tool in the kit. I didn't need it. You shouldn't need it, but this routes along the firewall and fender well to hide itself. The only issue you're going to have is removing this from under the pedal. Easiest way is to take a flathead, pop this off the pedal itself, it'll pop right off, and take it out as an assembly. The other issue is twisting this out. It's not that big of a, if you just get a big pair of pliers, grab onto this, it'll only twist one way and it'll pop right out. And then you just push it out the firewall. There is an issue getting it in because it only goes in one way. So if you look at this collar on this, it's flat, and then it has another collar underneath that twists only one way. But the issue you have is one of these has a rounded edge on it. This one right here. So this corner is actually rounded. It's not square like the others. So it can only go in that holder one way, and you're gonna have to just keep trying to stick it in until it goes in all the way, and then twist it in place. I'll show you on the car. Again, just under the firewall, here's where the master cylinder sits, and as you'll see, there's that plastic clip back there. I just took that flathead, I pried it out, pops right out, and then it slides out of this little holder on the other side. Under here, like I said, as you can see right there, it only goes in one way, and it has that collar on it, and it twists in place. The boot around it, you can push that in from the firewall. It's no big deal. Whatever you do, do not put the clutch connector in there. The pin that goes in there, if you do, you'll have to struggle with it. So now we'll push it in. It just pops in place, and we'll just pop it on the clutch pedal up higher. Alright, so if you guys made a boo-boo like me, I left it in gear when I put it on my jack stands, or when I put it on the ramps. So now what the issue is clutch works fine, clutch works great. You press it on the clutch, starts right up, doesn't move, and I couldn't get it out of gear. So as you look at the shaft, right, there's bushings in here, and I put some grease on this, but as you look at this shaft, it has pins that need to go on each side. The pins have to be lined up to work properly. So, and those bushings, everything plays a part. If we look down in here, as you can see, those pins aren't lined up. The one on the top right is an inch further than the one on the left. So what I'm going to have to do, let's see if I can hold all three at once, is take a screwdriver, go down there, and push on the pin on the left and get it to line up with the pin on the right. Push the pin on the left in, and with the clutch in, it slid right forward. So now it's in place to where I can shift around. I'm in neutral now, and I can go ahead and put all this back together. So next we drop the ball back in place, notch side towards us, and if you want to check and see if you can shift around, you can put this back on here, you can put it back on there and shift it around. But you're going to put the cap and the top bushings, put the top bushing on first, put the cap on. It's those T40 screws, and then you start putting your boots on one layer at a time with the cover, and then the boot, and then the two screws that go in the